Philip Lawler is our guest today to talk about whether or not the bishops should have shut down our churches due to COVID-19. How did we respond to this? Did we respond well? And we also discuss whether or not bishops should have term limits. What do you think? Find out today and whenever you tune in right
that
now.
We were lacking supernatural faith, that we needed the courage to stand up to a culture that says fear, 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 and we needed to respond with great courage, but we didn't. What say you, Philip Lawler?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. As I try to argue in the book, fear is contagious. Faith is also contagious. And the church should be spreading faith, the contagion of faith, if you want to put it that way. And at a time when the world was frightened, the church should be providing perspective, a perspective that says your physical health is not the only thing you should be worried about. You should be more concerned about your spiritual health. In fact, if you're worried about your physical health, all the more reason to be concerned about your spiritual health, because you want to be in shape to meet our Lord when that time comes. And it was a frightening thing to me when I woke up one day and realized I couldn't go to Mass. Not because I was sick, but because the churches were closed. The doors were closed to me because our pastors had determined that I should not be given the sacraments. And to me, that was so unthinkable. It took me months and the writing of this book to get over it. And I'm not sure I'm over it yet.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with you. I think I remember at first, okay, they're going to shut down for a couple of weeks just to see how things go. Fine. It seems prudential, whatever. But then you get a month into it and you're like, hold on, this is something different. And all of a sudden you're scrolling through your social feed and it's one live stream after another Mass live streamed. And then it becomes almost pointless because there's no value. There's so many and it just... Who's actually watching these things, and are they treating them with any sort of sacredness or a reverence? I remember, getting my kids up and dressing them for Sunday Mass, but going to the living room to install a TV to watch the Mass, and just feeling like this is not good enough. And I remember saying that on social media and getting sort of the pushback. How dare you suggest? How dare you suggest? Don't you want to save those that would be harmed by this? What would you say to that, Phil Lawler?
Again, I'd agree with you. Watching the Mass on TV or on live stream or however you do it is a poor substitute for actually being there, participating in the Holy Sacrifice. It's not the same. Our Catholic faith is always a faith in which the sacraments are tangible. You need water for baptism. You don't need much else, but you must have water. You need bread and wine. You need to be there. And sure, if you can't be there, then Zoom or whatever it is better than nothing, but it is not the same. And another thing that I worry about a great deal is, you tell me about the pushback that you felt, and that's not uncommon. When anyone suggested during the worst of the shutdown that live stream Mass was not the same as being at Mass, they were criticized for being imprudent, uncharitable, but they were right. And after months of telling people, don't worry about getting to Mass, you can watch it on live stream, now the doors are open again. Are the people coming back? Because my strong sense is that we will have lost a lot of people.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that.
When you tell people, don't worry about it, if you're not comfortable, don't come. Well, how comfortable do I have to be? I'm really comfortable in bed on Sunday morning.
Right. Now, I wonder, not only how many people probably won't come back, but I wonder how many bishops are going to hold on to keeping the dispensation in place, the Sunday obligation dispensation in place. I mean, the diocese I'm in, as far as I know, it's not been lifted yet. Everybody else is acting like we're back to normal again, but the dispensation hasn't been lifted. So I wonder how many dioceses are going to keep their dispensations in place, and when, if ever, they're going to try to get back to a sense of, no, there's a reason why there's a Sunday obligation, and we have to adhere to that.
Well, I haven't tracked it carefully, but as best I know, every diocese that has lifted the dispensation and told people to come back has included a sort of codicil. If you're sick or you are vulnerable, then you still are dispensed.
Yes.
And that's kind of a get out of jail free card. And now roll the camera forward a few months. Winter is going to come again. And every winter there's at least a flu. And if you are vulnerable, if you feel a little sniffle, if you feel like you might catch the flu from somebody else, and now I'm talking about just a regular seasonal flu, is that a reason to skip mass? Because this is the underlying issue here, is that the bishops, all of our pastors made the decision that this disease was so frightening that we should shut everything down. Well, how frightening does it have to be? And who makes that decision? To me, it seems we are reasonable, responsible adults. We should make the decision the way we always have. We've always thought if you're too sick to go to church, don't go to church.
Right.
If you have a bad infectious disease, don't go to church for the sake of your fellow parishioners. But if you're perfectly healthy, to say, I don't want to go to church because there is a chance, less than a 1 in 100 chance, that I might get a disease which might be fatal, although there too it's very unlikely for if you're reasonably healthy. That spikes all of your spiritual growth. There's something seriously wrong with the message.
I mean, there's sex abuse scandals still going on. There's money scandals going on. There's the lack of supernatural courage during a pandemic, and on it goes. So, okay. I mean, I think I heard you say that we're seeing sort of the fruit of the same culture that was persistent back in those days.
Yes. I think that they all stem from the same cause. But to answer your question really quickly, I was more shaken by the lockdown of the churches than I was by the sex abuse scandal. Even though I was living at ground zero, I knew people personally, I spoke to many victims and a few perpetrators. And it was terribly shocking, of course, and depressing. But to me, it never reached the level of disorientation, personal disorientation that I felt when the churches were closed. I thought, well, I knew there were bad priests. I found out there were bad bishops as well. But at least I always had access to the sacraments. And then last year, I didn't have access to the sacraments. And by choice, not my choice. That to me was more shocking. But I think all of these scandals, I trace them to a common source, which is the willingness of church leaders to play by the rules of a secular society, to judge themselves and to judge the church, the success of the church, by how it appears in the eyes of the world, which is always going to work wrong. When you try to conform to the world in order to gain prestige, what happens is you get neither. You don't get prestige, and you don't get the power that you want. You lose the influence that you have. You lose the cohesion, because the church runs on faith. The church doesn't run on prestige. And I feel that then Cardinal Ratzinger was being prophetic when he said that he could foresee a smaller but more influential church, as he said, a creative minority. That seems to be always the time when the church grows, when it faces opposition and faces it boldly.
Phil Lawler is our guest. We were talking about his book, The Contagious Faith, published by Sophia Institute Press. But I want to transition to this article over on CatholicCulture.org. Term limits for church leaders, a policy created to be ignored, by Phil Lawler. Tell us about this article.
You know, it's funny. It made more of a splash than I expected. I thought I was just reporting. This is something that I do, reporting on Catholic affairs, reporting on what's going on at the Vatican. Pope Francis, I guess it was a couple of years ago, instituted a new policy that leaders of the Roman Curia, Vatican officials, would have term limits, that they would be appointed for 5-year terms, and that there should not be a presumption that they would be reappointed, that ordinarily they would cycle through to serve a term and move on, and that they would retire at the age of 75 unless the Pope chose to keep them. Well, I just looked through the list of the leaders of the Roman Curia, and I pointed out, as a matter of fact, that most of them are beyond their 5-year term. Many of them are beyond the age of 75. Now, there's no question the Pope gets to have the aides he wants. It's his choice. It's just, I thought, a sort of funny thing that having instituted the policy, he is not really paying much attention to it himself.
Well, Phil Lawler is our guest. We have about 7 minutes left in our conversation. I was reading the article, and what struck me, and maybe this is why it's making such a splash, is because it seems as though to me that whenever a good bishop, like Cardinal Sarah, for instance, whenever they reach the age where it's time to submit your resignation, time to retire, then usually the Pope tends to, at least from my observation, I don't know if it's factually true, but the Pope tends to accept those resignations. But a lot of these other players that are maybe not as orthodox or as wonderful seems to stick around for longer and longer and not have their resignation accepted. In a different case, the story of Cardinal Marx, who was not reaching retirement age, but did send in a resignation letter because of unorthodoxy, and his resignation was not accepted. So I think maybe that is the reason why it's made a splash. Could you comment on that?
Yes, there's no question that the pattern you're observing is there. But again, he's the Pope. He makes the decisions. Nobody disputes his authority to choose the people he wants, and to when he no longer wants them, he can replace them. That's clear. He has chosen to replace Cardinal Sarah. He chose a few years ago to replace Cardinal Muller as prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. And Cardinal Muller at that time, he sort of took one for the team. He was very gracious, and he said, well, the Pope has just instituted this new policy about not returning people for a second term, 5-year term, and I'm the first one to whom it applied. Well, that was true then, but it's applied to a whole bunch of people since then, and they haven't been replaced. Again, that's the Pope's decision. He wants to make that decision. He has the authority to do it. I guess I was just calling attention to the fact that he's doing it selectively, as you say.
And I think, as you point out, there's not much we can do about that. I mean, he's the Pope and we're not. But in this sort of current culture, this conversation that's happening in the United States with the USCCB, with the Holy Eucharist, the document on the discussion that could possibly happen in November that might amount or might not amount to anything really. How do we see the role of bishops in regards to these sort of hot button issues politically? I mean, this particular instance in your article seems to suggest there's a little, as we discussed, there's a little favoritism going on. We like these bishops and not these, and so these are going to go be applied to this and not that. Are we ever going to see a day and an age where they just go with the faith and teach the faith and adhere to this faith, or is this going to be common until the end of time?
There's probably always going to be a tendency in bishops, particularly ambitious bishops, to do whatever is fashionable with the current pontificate, to curry favor in high places. But I'm hopeful that one of the things that's going to come out of this era of crisis in the church is a greater sense of empowerment of individual bishops. The individual diocesan bishop, he is the authority in his own diocese. He's not a branch manager for the Pope. He is the bishop in that diocese. And regarding, for instance, this document that's been discussed so much about a policy for withholding communion from people who are flouting the teachings of the church, any diocesan bishop can do that right now. He doesn't need the go-ahead from anyone. In fact, you could argue, I think quite persuasively, the canon law, specifically Canon 915, gives him not just the right, but the duty to implement that policy right now. It doesn't matter ultimately what the USCCB, the Conference of Bishops, says. It matters what the individual bishop says. And there too, I would argue that faith is contagious. And if you have strong bishops who take strong stands, people will flock to them. Speaking, it's the bishops who pull their punches who won't get that kind of following.
Speaking of contagious, if I'm not mistaken, in the Archdiocese of Chicago, they require vaccinations in order to come to Holy Mass and thus come to communion, but they don't require that, the position on marriage or the position on abortion or in vitro or these types of things. Those are optional, but vaccination, you have to have that. I find that fascinating. But what do you think about these bishops that say, well, we want to be more pastoral? Well, do we have any records or any knowledge? Have they actually been pastoral? Have they been meeting with these pro-choice politicians, for instance, and trying to discuss what the church teaches and why, in hopes of winning them back into the church?
Honestly, I think that's a filibuster tactic. If you are a bishop and you have someone in your diocese who's very prominent Catholic, who's very prominently in support of unrestricted abortion, you've had 20, 30 years to have that private conversation. I really don't want to hear you say now, I need time to have a private conversation with him. That conversation should have taken place years ago. Now, I don't need to be informed when you sit down with him. That is a private conversation. But eventually, are you going to take action or are you not? And now we see the pushback coming from liberal democratic members of the House of Representatives who are essentially challenging the bishop, saying, you don't dare to withhold communion from me. And boy, if the bishops don't take a stand, they're going to be run over by the political machinery.
Yeah, it seems like that fish or cut bait moment is upon them. So let's pray for our bishops that they will have courage and they will do.
If you like that interview, check out some of our other videos, and don't forget to like and subscribe and comment down below what you think of this interview and any questions, comments, or concerns that you may have. And be sure to share this with someone that you think will find this informative and inspiring. God love you.